Welcome to Healthy Life. In for Dr. Timothy Johnson, I'm Susan Wagner. After any kind of traumatic event, post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, can set in. What are the signs and symptoms of PTSD, and what's the best treatment? Joining us for insight is Dr. Edna Foa, Director of the Center for the Treatment and Study of Anxiety at the University of Pennsylvania and a world authority on PTSD. Dr. Foa, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome. Let's start out with the signs and symptoms. What is PTSD, and when does it actually become PTSD?
PTSD is a cluster of symptoms that occur after a traumatic event has been experienced. It's divided into, the symptoms are divided into three clusters. The experience cluster includes nightmare, flashbacks, intrusive thoughts about the trauma, fear of contacting with events that remind you of the trauma. And then there is the avoidance cluster, which include avoiding situations that remind you of the trauma, avoiding thinking about the trauma, and also avoiding feeling, especially positive feelings, are being avoided.
Now, I would assume that some of these symptoms are quite normal, and you would expect to have them for a certain period of time. Is that the case?
Yes. The majority of people, after being in a severe traumatic event, like what's happening now in Virginia Tech, and are exposed to closely to the events, would have some of the symptoms or all of the symptoms.
So the closer you are to the event, are you then more at risk for getting PTSD?
Absolutely. We have many studies that are showing that the more contact you have with the event, the more likely you are to have post-traumatic stress disorder.
One of the things that we've been seeing on television, of course, is this outpouring of grief that the students are having on campus. Grief is not PTSD, correct?
Grief is not PTSD, but the symptoms of grief are overlapping with symptoms of PTSD. The difference between the symptoms of grief and PTSD is that in grief, mostly you feel sadness, and in PTSD, you mostly feel anxiety.
When is it time to seek help for what you think might be PTSD?
I would say within 2 or 3 weeks after the traumatic event had happened, and if the symptoms are still as severe as they were in the beginning, that's the time to seek treatment from somebody who is an expert in how to treat people with PTSD.
One of the things that I know you've looked at is the effect of watching television on events like this. I know you've looked at this in terms of what's happened to people 9/11. Any sense that people could experience PTSD just from watching this on TV?
Well, at 9/11, I didn't do the study. Somebody else did the study. They found about 2.5% to 4.5% of people in United States that had PTSD symptoms from after watching the 9/11. And the more people watched it, the people that watched it a lot were more likely to have PTSD. But mostly people, as I said, do not get PTSD from watching a half an hour or even 15 minutes or even an hour. We're talking here about people who watched after 9/11, watched the television all day, from morning till evening for several days because.
Right. Well, I think unfortunately that's all we have time for now. Thank you so much, Dr. Foa.
You're welcome.